results are significant. Since the foundation of the Unified Care Team, we've increased shelter referrals by 83%. Over 1,000 people have come indoors. And tents on sidewalks and in parks have been reduced by half, from over 1,000 when I first took office.
Well, that's Mayor Bruce Harrell right there, talking about some of the progress the city is making on homelessness. Is that enough for the Seattle City Council, which is talking with the King County Regional Homelessness Authority this week? The council's also talking about public safety, making sure there are charges against the 6 people who were protesting at a council meeting last month. We'll have more on that. And we're talking about what's happening for app-based workers, some changes ahead. Discussing this and a whole lot more on Seattle News, Views, and Brews this week, your Coffee Break political podcast. I'm Brian Callanan. I'm a host on Seattle Channel, and the views expressed here are mine. I am joined by my co-host, David Croman, the City Hall reporter for the Seattle Times. And David, I saw this post and I had to ask about this. You have some new pets at the house, and that's pets with an S because there are 5 million of them. What's going on, man?
Yeah, every year we buy beneficial nematodes that we then spray into our garden because a couple years ago we had these cabbage maggots that ate all of our brassica plants, or ate the roots of our brassica plants and killed them. So we spray these nematodes that target them and kill them, and it's actually worked pretty well. We haven't had the problem for the last 3 years. So we just put on a new layer of our 5 million pets once a year.
That's great. And there probably isn't even a leash ordinance. That's great.
Yeah,
news.
exactly.
I can't wait to learn more about that. David, always something interesting. I thank you, sir. Thank you also to our patrons like William. A big thanks to you. Asked a question that we're going to respond to at the end of this podcast here. Jump in at the $5 per month level, folks. We answer your questions on the podcast. That's for our patrons. Plus, you get access to Patrons First episodes as well. We have a great one coming very soon. Find us on Patreon at Seattle News, Views, and Brews, and email us at Seattle News, Views, and Brews, spell it all out there, at gmail.com. Also, a big thanks to Converge Media. The video version of this podcast is on Converge Wednesday nights at 7. All right, here we go with Right Here, Right Now. David, an interesting presentation this week in the Housing and Human Services Committee. We always record this podcast early in the week to try to let people know what's going on, but I'm not exactly sure what to expect here. King County Regional Homelessness Authority is talking about how some services like prevention and outreach, those are basically moving back to the purview of the city of Seattle. I wanted to ask this question because I know the council is going to be asking this too. What impact do you think that's going to have on our homeless population? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I don't know as far as what it means immediately, and we'll see. I mean, I think some people think it might mean kind of more proactive stance toward homeless encampments, because I know that's been a concern from Mayor Harrell and some of the council members about what the Regional Homelessness Authority has or hasn't done on that front. But, I mean, I think it's almost as important symbolically of what it means. I mean, we know that the mayor and this council has had some questions about the Regional Homelessness Authority and how how the city's money is being spent there. And so, the fact that this first step has happened, I'd be curious to know if more to come. My colleagues at the Project Homeless team are kind of following this a little more closely than I am.
Yeah, fair. I know we've talked about it on the podcast too, the city actually drawing back about 10% of the money that it usually has been putting forth to the Regional Homelessness Authority every year. So that's a piece of the puzzle here. And I thought it was interesting in looking at this presentation that KCRHA is making to the council. They're celebrating some accomplishments like, hey, we paid 100% of our bills on time here in 2024, which is great. They were not doing that last year, which was a problem. I guess it's going to be, for me, a real test of just how this agency performs from day to day, what kind of budget it can expect here too. And maybe I can go down that path with you when we start talking about what the KCRHA is going to get. Some of the questions that were surrounding it last year, it looks like it's righted the ship. But then I think about a council that is definitely in a budget squeeze this year with that $230 million budget deficit they're staring right in the face. What kind of support do you think the council is going to give to the RHA? Any thoughts on that piece of it?
Yeah, again, I don't know. I mean, I would be surprised if it was like more beyond what they already are. I think this council is probably feeling good about KCRHA's leadership. I know the mayor is feeling good about it because this is somebody that he's worked with, Daryl Powell, and has known for many, many years.
The new CEO, right.
So, Right, the new CEO. So yeah, again, I mean, I don't know that anything is going to be getting additional investment, and this is a council that has said, its members have said on the campaign trail, they don't want to spend more money without kind of making sure the money that's being spent is being spent in the proper way. And I think when they say that, they really are talking about homelessness in a lot of ways, because there's been sort of a frustration, I think, among some voters that progress hasn't been speedier, and so again, the agreement between the city of Seattle and the KCRHA, I think, is up for renewal next year.
Right.
And so, I know for sure that I don't think this council is going to want to take any major leaps forward with the relationship this year, because I think they kind of see that renewal process as the time when they want to have sort of a conversation about what the future looks like in general. So my expectation would be maybe you kind of tread some water this year, and then they have a serious conversation about it next year.
Great observation there. That renewal period is going to be a very important one. And it's just been interesting to me to watch this parade of presentations from different departments go in front of the council. And they're asking some important questions here, but it's just such a barrage of information. And when you really try to pick apart the investments that Seattle and King County are making in homelessness, that's a fire hose of information in and of itself. So interested to see what comes out of this presentation, and interested again to see what happens in the long haul, like you're saying there, David, because I think there's still a lot more that the council needs to look into there with that relationship and how much they're going to end up paying towards the RHA in the future here. But I did want to talk about another issue you wrote about with regard to the app-based drivers that are out there, DoorDash, apps of this nature here, because there's another idea in committee this week. This is the Governance, Accountability, and Economic Development Committee, Council President Sarah Nelson's committee here. She's talking about making changes potentially to the minimum wage statute the last city council put in place to ostensibly protect drivers for DoorDash and other similar apps. That's what the old council was trying to do here. Also protect them when they got booted off of the app from situations like that. David, this is a bit of a moving target right now, and I know the council's still in kind of consideration and building here, but what's the big picture here? What is the council considering here when it comes to changing this law that the old council put in place?
Yeah, I think the net effect will be that the companies are spending less, don't have to pay out as much to drivers.
Right.
The way that they're accomplishing that is the current proposal that I've seen, and I think my sense is the one that will probably get the most conversation. I think I wouldn't be surprised if it ends up kind of looking like this in the end. But proposal I've seen is it sort of changes the payment measurement system away from what drivers are getting paid per trip, which is sort of what's happening now. If you take a trip, you minimum you get $5 for that trip, and then there's sort of a minimum per minute, minimum per mile. The new structure would get rid of the minimum $5 payment, and it would switch it to a weekly or a whatever, maybe bi-weekly, depending on when the drivers actually get paid out standard. So then they would do sort of a retroactive look at what the drivers had done in that period, and if it was below minimum wage, they would bring them up to the city's minimum wage, the roughly $20 an hour. The thought there is, I mean, basically it allows, because the challenging thing with all these gig-based minimum wage laws, and we saw a lot of this conversation with Uber and Lyft stuff too, is it's sort of hard to get to nail, to exactly match what the city's broader minimum wage is, because when you're a driver, you work 8 hours, but of course you're not driving for 8 straight hours. Some of that is you're waiting for the next trip, or maybe you take a lunch. And so sort of how you measure that to get it to something close to $20 an hour is difficult. And so I think the thought behind this proposal is it just puts more control, honestly, in the hands of the companies to calculate it out and get closer to that exact $20 an hour. Because right now they're saying we're paying $26 an hour, and it's breaking our bank. So this new proposal would lower the calculation, like lower the per mile rate, while also kind of putting more control in the hands of the companies to move the levers and try and match something like minimum wage.
Got it. I guess you could see it as, I mean, maybe the council, the previous council was shooting too far here and pushing for a rate that was above maybe what the market could bear. But we're not doing away with a minimum wage for these drivers. I think that's an important point here. These drivers are going to get something. They're just trying to recalibrate this thing, it sounds like, so that it's not as onerous on the companies. Is that kind of what we're looking at here?
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah, there will be some minimum wage. The
Mm-hmm.
the argument now that the companies are making is the minimum wage that's guaranteed to the app-based drivers is just too high.
Right.
The
Yep.
the counter argument to that is a lot goes into, if you work for a delivery company and you were an employee,
Yeah.
they would provide you with a truck, they would pay for the gas, they would do all the maintenance.
Mm-hmm.
As a gig-based worker, of course, those are all your responsibilities. And so
Mm-hmm.
the people who have pushed for this proposal, namely Working Washington, or
Yes.
pushed for the previous law, their argument is, even if it is $26 an hour, that isn't actually that much higher than minimum wage, because a lot of that is going into wear and tear on vehicles and
Yep.
things like that. But
Yeah.
at the end of the day, the goal of this new conversation is to get it so deliveries are less expensive than they are now, and therefore make it so people want to use the services again at the way that they used to.
Right, which can have an impact on the restaurants, which can have an impact on the drivers, and can have an impact on these larger companies too. But I wanted to ask this question, David, and I think we've talked about this before, but it's so difficult because you're trying to hit these different data points, right? Here's the minimum wage where it should be. Here's the wage that the drivers need. Here's how many hours they need to try to get the amount of money that they're trying to get on a weekly basis. But then that X factor, or whatever variable you want to call it, Q, I'm not sure. You don't have that data from DoorDash, meaning, okay, how much are you actually making per delivery here? That sort of information is not readily given up by these larger companies, and I think that makes for a bit of a frustrating turn in this. What do you think?
Yeah, and this is a frustrating thing. We saw this with Uber, we saw this with Lyft, we've seen this with DoorDash and Instacart. Is they're just steadfast refusal to tell you anything about basically justify their arguments. It's not to say they're incorrect or they're not true.
Sure.
But if you talk to people, even when you talk to people who have skepticism about the city's new minimum wage law and basically side with the company's argument, they will acknowledge that, yes, it's a frustrating and kind of self-inflicted wound that these companies aren't just coming out and showing their numbers and saying, here's what we were doing before the wage law, here's what we're doing after the wage law. And I think that would answer a lot of questions, but they're so protective of proprietary information and trade secrets and things like that they're willing to bet that they can win this argument without doing that. And actually, so far they're correct. They are winning this argument, it appears, at least with the new city council, because I'll say also this: the companies want this law repealed. That is their position. They just want,
but that's not going to happen.
Do not want it looks. No, which does not appear that it's going to happen. That the mayor hasn't shown an appetite for that. Council President Nelson hasn't shown an appetite for that. Drive forward this sort of drivers group that gets a lot of backing from the companies and is generally pro company. They don't support that. So, and I think the companies know that they're not going to win a full repeal, but they are going to win almost certainly a tweak to this. And so they've made a bet that they can do it without revealing any of their internal information. And at least so far, barring some changes, they're kind of on the path to doing that.
Yeah, got it. Wow, such an interesting topic. David, thank you for breaking that down. More on that in the Seattle Times. Check out what David has written there. All right, well, up next, that group of a half dozen protesters who were banging on the windows and finally arrested at a Seattle City Council meeting a few weeks ago. Yes, they will face charges. We're going to break down the details next on Now Hear This. Well, perhaps a surprise to no one, those 6 people who were protesting at a Seattle City Council meeting at the end of February, they were arrested after making a lot of different noise, banging on the windows. A lot of council members said they feared for their own safety, and so those arrests happened. Well, those people who were arrested have now been charged with gross misdemeanor trespassing, 1 charge of obstruction as well. It's part of an overall new approach, you could call it, from City Attorney Ann Davison to keep victims at the center of her role. She actually just talked about this in front of the City Council this week, talking about how, well, she's looking at victims, trying to make sure that they're taken care of here and making sure that they're protected.
It is recentering victims' voices in the public safety conversation so that we understand that no victim ever asked to be a part of the criminal legal system. And we are here to talk about that. If we decide to make a charge, it is in regards to understanding what has occurred to that victim.
In this case, of course, the city council feeling like victims in this situation. And I just wanted to talk about this, David, kind of how this all came together and what happens now. Is there going to be some sort of trial for these 6 people? How public is that going to be? Is it going to bring up some of these old concerns again? How do you look at this? Where do we go from here on this one?
Yeah, it's interesting because, it's a different kind of, a lot of the cases that are going through the courts are, shoplifting or property destruction, and it's, as we've talked about, it's a lot of the same people going through, and but it's not necessarily something, you don't often get cases in the misdemeanor courts that garner a lot of public attention. This one probably will, which is interesting. The high profile cases usually happen in King County court because they're felonies or whatever. It's going to be interesting that there will be a lot of eyeballs on how this one unfolds. I think what we might find is it moves really slowly because all these cases are moving really slowly for a lot of reasons.
Right.
People will tell you about backlogs and staffing capability and space in the jail. And so that'll be interesting to see kind of what light it sheds exactly how well the system is functioning at all. The vast majority of cases, particularly at the misdemeanor level, end in a plea deal. It will be interesting, though, because the Department of Public Defense has no love lost for the city attorney's office generally, and particularly Ann Davison, I would say. And so it'll be kind of interesting. And I would think these protesters are, they're protesters. They were there. They're sort of liberal progressive types. And I think a lot of them are probably not big Ann Davison fans. So it'll be interesting to see kind of how much they want to just wrap this case up with a plea of some sort, or if they push it to trial, in which case there will be, some public view into it. And, trials at this level tend to, it's something like 70%, I think, go in the favor of the defense because juries in Seattle are just, I think that's probably true of most misdemeanor courts, but, it's a progressive city and juries in Seattle feel hesitant to throw the book at people for things like shoplifting or whatever. And so, I think it would be interesting to see if this does go to trial, kind of that would put a lot of pressure on Ann Davison, I would think, to win this case. It could end up quietly in a plea deal, and that'll be that. I would think if I'm Ann Davison, that's kind of my preference. Or the client, the defendants and the defense attorneys feel like, hey, we've got an opportunity to kind of do something big in public here, and we're going to go to trial on this. Be interesting to see what they end up deciding to do.
Yeah, make a show out of it. Who knows? That's a great observation there. I did want to talk about these diametrically different type of viewpoints within the council, I should say, about what this protest was all about. You had someone like Bob Kettle, who is the chair of the Public Safety Committee, saying Seattle has endured a permissive public safety environment for too long, including in council chambers. That permissive public safety environment, one of his favorite phrases so far, that's for sure. But then you've got Councilmember Tammy Morales, and you quoted this in your article, David, saying the arrest and charges of these protesters was callous and it could cause long-term harm, upending the protesters' lives. Seattle has a long history of public dissent, and charging protesters for dissenting in the People's Chamber is undemocratic. End quote from Councilmember Morales there. Can you talk about those two different ideas here? Definitely the Kettle viewpoint is the one that's in the majority on the council right now, but how does that play out? Because this was just a very different view of what happened here at the council, a council that I should say has had a number of different sit-ins, et cetera, over the past several years. This new council is apparently sick of that and just isn't going to have it. Some thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, they're both pretty stark statements. There's not a lot of wishy-washiness in either of them, which stands out to me. And I mean, it goes to show, I would say, how much on an island Councilmember Morales is, because you're not going to get, not every statement or not every council member would maybe be as strong on this as as vocal about it as Kettle was, but certainly none of the other ones are going to call it undemocratic.
Right.
So, I mean, that's one thing. And then, yeah, I mean, it goes back to, I think, to what we were talking about before, which is what is the line here that the council is trying to draw, and how do you draw it in a way that doesn't lead to something like this every time? Because I don't know that anyone was pleased with the result of this. Council people say they felt safe, and then you've got some people who are probably not pleased to be going through the criminal justice system. So,
Sure.
how does the council, if I guess one question that I don't have an answer to is what permissive environment exactly was Kettle talking about? Because it's true that it's been raucous for the last 10 years. And it's true also that they're saying, they felt endangered, but we haven't had arrests before. And, there's a fine line between speech that makes you uncomfortable, which happens all the time, is protected by the First Amendment and fairly regular occurrence in the city hall, and speech that, or actions, I suppose, that actually could lead to dangerous outcomes. And I think a lot of the council people probably had January 6th at the back of their head when they're looking at this and trying to stop something along those lines. But, there's going to be a lot more people who yell and shout at them in the future. And, it just, there's clearly not agreement on how to handle that.
Right. And it's not something that's easy to do. These are things that happen in the moment. I think you're right that was not an outcome that anybody wanted in terms of those arrests or whatever else, but they certainly didn't want people banging on the windows of City Hall and making them feel unsafe. It's something that when Kathy Moore, the council member who called for those arrests to happen, it was something where clearly a lot of council members felt unsafe. How did they get there, though, was the point that you raised as well. So, yeah, that's going to be something that'll be playing out over the next several months here, and we'll see how the council has learned from that experience. But I did want to take it one step back, if I could, because those protesters were actually talking about some of the asylum seekers in our area and their need for services, because a number of them are homeless. I did want to touch on this very briefly because some news came through just this week about Washington Governor Jay Inslee signing off on a budget here that actually includes more than $25 million for asylum seekers. A report from KNKX here I'm talking about. Most of this funding goes to the Office of Refugee and Immigrant Assistance for Services. A $2.5 million check is going right to the city of Tukwila because they've had so many people staying down there at the Riverton Park United Methodist Church. I've talked to a few people down there. A very disturbing situation, humanitarian situation there. I guess I wanted to talk about this larger issue because I see this as a point of celebration. $2.5 million going down there and trying to help out these asylum seekers. But man, what a Band-Aid, David, for a situation that is clearly, going to take years to unwrap. Because in talking with some of these asylum seekers, it's like, yeah, I'm here and I've got a court date. Okay, great. When is it? Oh, in 2032. It's so many years away. I just wonder what happens long term with these asylum seekers that are still down in Tukwila and still arriving every day. Any thoughts on this one? It's a very fraught legal issue.
Yeah, it's I've been down there actually once before, and I think the sense is, especially among the people who've been providing services, is that this is kind of a political hot potato. That I think anyone involved in this understands that there is, if they take on part of this issue, they're going to be dealing with this issue for a long time because, for whatever reason, there are reports that people are showing up with photocopies of this church's address on it that they got in Mexico.
Or West Africa for that matter. It's crazy.
Right. So word is out about this one particular place. So people are probably going to keep coming. I think that money probably allows them to spend more on hotel rooms because it's really crowded at that church. It's like it's not a long-term situation there. But even that, I mean, so what do? You put people up in a hotel, and where do they cook? Where do they do their laundry? And a lot of them, even when they go to hotels, are coming back to this church and using the kitchen and using the laundry space because they've got families and people they need to feed. So money, I think, is good, but it is sort of it's a question mark about what the kind of lasting solution to this is. It's suddenly become sort of this is a national question that I think a lot of jurisdictions are asking themselves, and here we are in Washington, and we're needing to answer some of the same ones.
Yeah, national, international. It's such a a fraught issue legally. I keep on coming back to that because this was a situation on the day of that protest, February 27th. Council President Nelson was saying, no, there's a county issue. You stop talking about this county. It's not on our agenda. And then, some of these same protesters actually, or similar concept behind them, actually went to King County and said, hey, we need to talk about these people. And they ended up getting some money from the county as well. It's just such, the piece I'm left with is it's just such a patchwork piecemeal of, okay, here's some money from the state, here's some from the county, and we're going to kind of try to build this plane at 30,000 feet in the air. I don't, do you get that sense they're just trying to take money from many different places to survive, I guess?
For sure, yeah. And it's up until now, it's been month to month. I imagine that goes a little further now that there's this money here. But, $25 million. I mean, we're talking, I think, more. They have records of more than 1,000 people coming through there. Not that there are that many there right now, but, $25 million probably doesn't house 1,000 people. And even if it did, I'm not sure where you would do it. So how many nights at a hotel is 1,000 times, divided 25 million divided by 1,000 or whatever it might be. At the end of the day, it's not actually that many nights in a hotel. There needs to be a long-term solution here. I think there's a sense of the folks who are operating the church that not everybody is playing ball. I think they would like to see more of a regional buy-in. Not always mentioning Seattle by name, but it's sort of implied that they're kind of curious where Seattle is in this whole situation. And I think that's a question that Seattle probably doesn't want to get involved. And we know that Councilmember Nelson said she didn't want to get involved. They have a lot of other things that they were elected to deal with. They did not think this was one of them. But that's the nature of being a politician, is you think you're elected to do one thing and then something else comes up.
Yeah. Well, we will see how the Seattle City Council deals with this, King County, and now the state offering some dollars as well. Thank you for that, David. All right. Well, coming up, answering a patron question about cultural space and cultural spending in Seattle. Very important question. We thank you, William, for sending it. That's next on You Ask, We Answer. Well, we always like answering questions from our patrons, and we need some more in the pipeline here, folks. I want to make sure that people send in an email, if you're a patron, to Seattle News, Views, and Brews, spell it out, @gmail.com. We will answer it, and we will make sure that you get the input that you need on your question. So William sent this one a while ago, and William, I'm sorry, it's taken a little while for me to dig into this, but here's what I got. William's question was this: I'm curious to know what's become of the Cultural Space Agency, an initiative by the City Council a couple of years ago, puts a question mark there, that was supposed to connect cultural organizations with city properties that can serve as venues for the arts. Okay, so here's the deal, William. I talked to the city about this, and I talked to the Cultural Space Agency. Here's what the city told me. So, just a correction on this. The CSA, this Cultural Space Agency, does not exclusively connect these cultural organizations with city-owned properties. Their projects actually develop various types of properties, including affordable housing development, commercial, and all that. Check out the culturalspace.agency website to learn a little bit more on that. And just a clarification on how this all works. The Cultural Space Agency is actually a public development authority, a PDA. It's chartered by the city of Seattle to secure some long-term affordable commercial space, cultural space, as a matter of fact. You bring in community partners, you try to focus on the needs of Black and Indigenous communities, and the city is continuing to support the CSA here and some of the projects there, such as the Building Arts Space Equitably project, BASE. The CSA is its own agency, has its own staff, etc. So that's a big part of it. And talking to the CSA about this, I reached out to them as well. It looks like they're working on a few things. They're trying to solidify some of their systems and policies out there. It's a very small staff, 3 of which have been on for about 7 or 8 months, including the actual leader of the group. 2 have been on for 6 months, and 2 are brand new. So they're really working on getting this thing off the ground here. This building art space equitably, that looks like the big project that they're working on right now. They're trying to form a program called Beyond Base that would be designed to support the capacity of community art and cultural property projects with some paid advisors. They're still working on trying to figure out how that's going to go. So they're working on a number of different things. You may have seen their work at King Street Station in partnership with some nonprofits down there, but they are still working on a lot of different things at once, it sounds like right now, trying to finalize some different acquisitions out there. So a nonprofit that is working with the city here to try to bring some more cultural space into our community. That's the big answer I have for you here, William. And David, I just wanted to bring you into the mix because I think this is such an interesting space to talk about, cultural space and art, especially as we come out of the pandemic, for one, and especially as we talk about funding and the lack of it for the Seattle City Council. I just get a little concerned for different arts-based agencies when we start talking about budgeting, because I always feel like that's the first thing to go. Any general thoughts on that picture?
Yeah, I think historically it is. I mean, this city, this is also the city though that has mandated, I can't remember exactly what the percentage, maybe 1% of like major
for art,
budgets goes in for art. I mean, this is the city that in the past has tried to keep art kind of front and center. I assume that there will be budget cuts to arts programs because there will probably be budget cuts to most, but perhaps in a city like Seattle, it won't quite be the bloodbath that it could be in other places.
Here's hoping.
But yeah, and I think a lot of arts agencies in general, I think there was a fairly decent, some support during the pandemic, maybe through PPP loans or whatever it might be. And I think a lot of that has fallen away. And my sense is a lot of them have some question mark about people's willingness to come back out. You know, you get a habit of going to art shows. You used to go to First Thursday or whatever every week. And then you took a year off, or you got used to that. And you didn't, there's just a routine, I think, to going and seeing art that maybe has not fully returned for some people. And so my sense is, just from what I've read, is it's a precarious position to be an arts organization in general right now.
Can be. Tough to flick the switch off and flick it back on in terms of helping out our different arts programs here. But a lot going on with that space, and I really appreciate the question, William. Keep them coming to Seattle News, Views and Brews @gmail.com. All right, need to wrap up, David. It's opening day time for baseball. I'm excited. You're excited about watching games, but I know in reading some of your posts, you are not excited about people putting shoes on their heads, as we saw during the big rally situations for the Mariners in 2002. What's wrong with the shoe? It's the rally shoe. It's in the Mariners Hall of Fame, that shoe that Birkenstock he put on his head when the Mariners actually made the playoffs. What do you got against the shoes?
Just hygiene. The floor of that stadium is pretty gross. Turn your hat inside out, do whatever you need to do, but please don't put your shoe on your head.
Yeah, I thought the shoe was a little over the top too. And you know what? They're going to need a lot more than shoes this year. How about some base hits? And we'll see how it goes with pitching too. But I appreciate that, David. Rally shoe did look a little bit silly. We got to come up with something cooler for the M's here in 2024. Well, thank you, sir, for joining me. Thanks everybody who is listening to Seattle News, Views and Brews, where you can always find out what's brewing in local politics. Thanks especially to the patrons supporting the show. Thanks, William, for a great question. Please get in touch. Send us some questions. Seattle News, Views and Brews @gmail.com. Listen to us on Apple, Spotify, wherever you like to listen, and find Seattle News, Views and Brews on Patreon to show your support. Thanks for watching on Converge Media, too. See you next time. Seattle News, Views and Brews is an independent production of Callanan Media Services. Copyright 2024.